only his shorts. He was so obsessed with beating her that he hadn't heard me. He was using an ironing cord to whip her. Blood was running from her. She tried to grab hold of the cord. Boots was so engrossed in me either. She tried to cover her head with the pillow while pulling the sheet up around her body to protect as much of it as possible. Picking up a chair, sitting beside the dresser, I slipped up behind the trick and tried to cave his skull in. The chair splintered on the back of his head. He whirled around and reached for me. His face was covered with blood from the long nails Boots had raked him with. With the remains of the splintered chair, I struck him in the face. The chair didn't stop him. He grunted and wrapped his arms around me. He was as hairy as a gorilla. His chest, legs, arms, and back were covered with a thick, filthy... Since I'd entered the room, fear filled my mind. His foul breath was smothering me from our nearness. In desperation, I swung my knee up between his legs as hard as I could. A cry of pain exploded from his lips, and I kneed him again. His big frame began to fold up. Catching him by the hair, I pulled his head down and lifted my knee with all the force I could put into it. I caught him full in the face, crushing his nose and causing his teeth to scatter about the room. He had false teeth, because when he fell to the floor, he spit out the rest of them. He stared up at me, with fear in his eyes. When I saw that fear, I knew I had him. Grabbing up the ironing cord, I began to beat him viciously. His screams had the effect of waking up everybody in the hotel. The trick crawled towards a corner, and I beat his hulking body unmercifully. Every time he tried to get off his knees and come out of the corner, I'd kick him in the face. Suddenly he screamed, "That's it! That's it! Don't stop!" He gasped in shuddering ecstasy. I stared at him in astonishment. He held his penis tight and moaned sickeningly. The doorway was filling up with couples trying to peer in. The clerk stood in the doorway and stared in horror. His eyes kept going from the sickening sight of the perverted trick in the corner to Boots, naked and bloody, stretched out on the bed. Not realizing that I still held the ironing cord, I started towards the door to close it. Everybody in the doorway backed up. "Why?" the clerk said hotly. "If you start beating him again, I'm calling the police. I don't give a damn if that freakish honky in there wants you to beat him or not. I ain't having that kind of shit in this hotel." I slammed the door in his face. When I turned around, the trick was putting his clothes back on. My voice was cold and deadly. "Leave your money on the dresser. All of it, honky. Just consider yourself lucky that that's all it's gonna cost you, too. I should kill you, Peckerwood." He took all the money out of his wallet and placed it on the dresser. Then, clinging to the wall till he reached the door, he snatched it open and fled down the hallway. My heart began to beat normally again after he left. I realized that he could have beaten me to death if he hadn't been an arch coward. Assuming an air of compassion, I moved over to the bed and began to examine Boots. I found a pan, filled it with warm water, and washed her wounds gently. All the while I'd ignored the money on the dresser, but my mind was in an uproar from wondering how much was there. After I finished washing Boots and got her to go to sleep, I rushed over to the dresser. There was only $18 there. All the bills were $1 ones. I've been hoping for a couple of hundred, at least, but the singles had faked me out. It didn't take acute perception for me to realize that I would have to play some stores in the near future. Like early in the morning, I needed cash money, quick. Under the face bowl, I had hidden the last of a $20 spoon of cocaine. I sat up with a Coke and some weed till daylight invaded the room. The sound of the morning traffic had dwindled slightly when I got up and slipped on my Booster overcoat. It was a coat with shot pockets sewed onto the inside lining. 2 exceptionally large pockets, I might add. After smoking the last joint, I was ready for work. I glanced at the clock on the dresser. Just a little after 7, Boots moaned in her sleep. as I gave her a quick check on my way out the door. Out on the street, I pulled my collar up. The hail had stopped, but a freezing wind was blowing. I started the car and climbed back out to clean the windows. The car was warm by the time I got back inside. Traffic moved along at a brisk pace as I drove downtown. I stopped off and had breakfast, killing a little more time. Most of the main stores were still unopened. I parked on a side street and started walking. The first store I entered turned out to be a blank. There was nothing above the counter I could swing with, and not enough money in the till for me to note. Hitting the street again, I fell in step behind two well-dressed ladies. They walked fast in an attempt to escape the chilling wind. When they turned down a side street, I stopped and watched them run across the street and enter a modern-looking building. That made my mind up for me. I crossed the street and examined the name of the building. Reuben Donnelly Publishing Company. I started to examine it more closely as two secretaries rushed past. I followed them into the building. The corridor was empty. The lobby had been scantily furnished, just a few chairs. Next to two payphones, I found a directory. I scanned it quickly. The building had 6 floors. The printing department was located on the 2nd floor. I quickly decided to bypass that floor. I passed the elevators and found a door marked stairway. I took the stairs 2 at a time until I reached the top floor. I crept down the deserted hallway and discovered I'd reached the floor the cafeteria was on. Peeping through the window, I saw the sister I'd noticed enter the building. She seemed to be fixing up the counter. Except for the 2 women in uniform, the place seemed empty. Retracing my steps, I took the stairs down to the 5th floor. I hesitated before opening the door until the sound of high heels faded away. Straightening my coat, I removed a newspaper from my coat pocket. It was already turned to the wall dance. Gripping the paper firmly, the way I imagined a good job hunter would do, I stepped into the hallway. I smiled at the fleeting thought that it would really be amusing if I got hired. I walked down the hallway briskly, but silently. The first office I stopped at, I could see someone silhouetted through the shaded glass, so I crossed the corridor to another office. With my head beside the door, I listened patiently. Not hearing any sounds, I took the plunge. I stepped inside the office. The office was deserted, but the door leading to an adjoining room was open. I could hear a woman's voice coming from the other office. As I listened, I heard a man speak, but I couldn't make out the words. Quickly, I examined the room I was in. There were 2 desks in the office, both on the other side of the room from me. To reach either desk, I'd be in view of whoever was in the other room. The only thing in my favor was the thick carpet on the floor. I held my breath and began creeping. The woman had her back to the open door, while the man was sitting at his desk, with his head down, examining a cluster of papers. I passed the open door without being observed and reached the first desk. I bypassed it for the second desk, where a chair had been pushed back, as though someone had just risen. As quietly as possible, I opened the second drawer. The bottom one, on the right, had held only paperwork. It was empty, too. I moved over to the other side of the desk and pulled out a drawer. The first thing that met my eye was a large black pocketbook. I removed it and closed the drawer. The damn thing was too large to fit the pockets inside my coat, so I stuck it under my armpit. My heart skipped a beat as I heard the woman start for the door. I froze as the door opened wider. Should I break and run? Maybe I could brazen the bust out. I stepped from behind the desk. The sound of the man's voice halted the woman in the doorway. When she turned to answer, I made my move. Moving quickly but silently, I recrossed the short distance and reached the door, praying all the while that the woman framed in the doorway concealed me from the man's view. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, leaving the door ajar. Without looking back, I rushed towards the stairway. Before I reached the stairs, the elevator stopped and a woman got out. I gave her my dazzling smile and stepped into the elevator. I pushed the button for the first floor, then tried to arrange the awkward pocketbook under my arm so it wouldn't be conspicuous. At the second floor, the elevator stopped, causing my heart to flutter. An elderly woman peeped into the empty elevator. "Up?" she asked stupidly. "Down," I replied, as I pushed the button for the door to close. When I got downstairs and out on the street, I looked back over my shoulder at the building. This was one hell of a way to be spending my 17th birthday, I thought bitterly. I reached my car and rode away from the downtown district. After I found a small, deserted side street, I parked and started searching the pocketbook. The purse had $10 in cash in it. I cursed for about 10 minutes, then investigated the rest of the contents. The bank book I inspected with care. The $1,450 she had deposited in the bank really interested me. I examined all of her identification. Only her driver's license had a revealing W on it. I tossed the license out the window and started the car up. There was no way in the world for Boots to pass for white, but the rest of the ID could be used by her. The woman was 28 years old. Boots could pass for 28, with her belly sticking out in front of her a mile, providing we found a white bank teller. They always said we looked alike to them. Taking my time on the slippery streets, I reached the hotel with time to spare. The bank didn't open till 9. Whereas I was completely unfazed about stealing the purse, I did have a few qualms over Boots withdrawing the money. Despite my concern, I was going to make her try and withdraw all that cash. After all, I reasoned, if she fucked up and got caught, being pregnant would be in her favor when she went before the judge. Boots was lying on the bed, moaning when I entered the room. I put my hand on her head. It was hot. "I'm bleeding, Orson," she whispered. I stared down at her for a moment. "Listen, baby, ain't there something you can do? Like, pack yourself or something? Just slow the bleeding down? I got something I want you to do now." "I might not be able to stop the bleeding, Orson. I done already soaked through 2 pads in the sheet. I think I'm hemorrhaging." My mind was running super fast. I needed her now. "I tell you what, baby, take and pack yourself with cotton. Then get dressed, and I'll take passion in my heart." Nor was I conscious of any concern about her having a miscarriage. In fact, I hoped that she would lose the baby. If my mother could see me now, she couldn't help but be proud. At 17, I was developing into a cold, vicious pimp. This is the way I reasoned with myself, but in my heart, I knew that if Jessie could see what I was doing, she would have thrown up in my face. I needed that money, though, and time was something I didn't have. If I didn't get it this morning, it would be too late later on in the day. Boots was too slow getting dressed for me, so I helped her. After getting a maternity dress on her, I grabbed a spring coat and tossed it across her shoulders. She was in too much pain to notice that I'd left her heavy winter coat on the rack by mistake. The mistake had been made on purpose. I wanted the bank teller to be sure and see she was pregnant. Finally, we got ready to go. I had to just about carry her down the stairs. I began to have doubts about her holding up long enough for us to make it to a bank. At no time did I even think about taking her to a hospital or doctor. I wanted the money before the bank could be notified. There was another stop I had to make before going to the bank. I parked in a no-standing zone and rushed into a drugstore. I bought a pair of round-rimmed glasses and some pain pills. The eyeglasses she put on. The pills she couldn't swallow without water, and I didn't have the time to stop and get any. Driving towards the outskirts of town, I searched frantically for a branch office bank. I finally found one near the city limits. By this time, Boots seemed nearly delirious. Her legs were stretched out towards me, while her head was against the door. When I shook her, she didn't wake up completely. I got out of the car and picked up a handful of slush. Opening the car door on her side, I held her head and washed her face with dirty snow. She sputtered and spit, but the ice shocked her awake. "Listen, baby," I whispered. "You gonna have to be kind of sharp now. I done told you a dozen times how to do this and how simple it is." I had to help her out of the car. "All you got to do is fill out a withdrawal slip. give it to the teller, and get big bills. "You going with me, Daddy?" she asked, clutching my shoulder for support. "You know I am, baby. You don't think I'd send you by yourself, do you?" I said. I hadn't planned on going in with her, but a blind man could see she would never make it herself. I steered her through the bank entrance. While she filled out the slip, I arranged her coat so that her protruding stomach couldn't help but be seen. It's a belief of mine, I don't know if it's true or not, that people will never suspect pregnant women of a hoax. The mother image is so strong that most people wouldn't imagine a woman in this condition swindling anyone, let alone them. The only doubt I had after entering the bank was when the teller picked up the phone. The only reason I didn't run was that my hands were full trying to keep Boots on her feet. She put most of her weight on me, and I was really holding her up. When I turned back towards the bank teller, she was already talking on the phone. If I ran, I would have to drag Boots, because she was holding on to me for dear life. The teller hung up and smiled. She started counting out the money. To be fair to the lady whose money I was taking, I left $50 in the bank. Back in the car, I just about got Boots settled before she passed out. I pulled out into traffic and drove back towards town as fast as I dared. I still hadn't learned to drive too well, and not having a license, the last thing I wanted was to be stopped. I spotted a doctor's office on the other side of the street. Making a U-turn, I pulled up in front of the building. Some kind of way, I got her half awake so she could stand on her feet if I held her, and I managed to get her into the doctor's office. The receptionist took one look at me holding Boots up and rushed into another room. The white patient sitting around the room stared at us curiously. It wasn't long before she was back, followed by a bald-headed fat man. He was blowing as though he had just run a mile. He tossed his hands in the air. No. You must take her to her own gynecologist. Better yet, take her to an obstetrician. But this is the wrong place, young man. I was dumbfounded. I hadn't understood much of what he said, but I did comprehend wrong place. "You're a doctor, ain't you?" I asked belligerently. The doctor stared at me as though I were losing my mind. "I'm a dermatologist," he yelled. "Didn't you read the sign outside?" Boots slipped out of my arms and fell on the floor at my feet. The doctor looked as if he were going to have the baby. The nurse rushed to a telephone, while the doctor and I raved. I pulled my large roll of money out. Behind all I heard and knew of white people, I knew this would get results. "Look, Doc," I started to say, "I'll pay—" The doctor raised his hands toward heaven, spoke for a few moments in another language, then said, "I don't want your money. I'm a dermatologist. Don't you understand? There's nothing—" I interrupted him harshly. "Why, you color-struck bastard, you'd allow this young girl to suffer." "Ambulance. It will be here shortly." The doctor and I exchanged a few more choice words before the ambulance crew arrived. When they did arrive, we were standing over Boots, glaring at each other, while the nurse knelt beside her, giving her a shot. As I followed the stretcher from the office, I turned in the doorway. "You're about as useful as a doctor," I said loudly, "as a penis is on a sissy." As I started my car up to follow the ambulance, I glanced at the sign. Dermatologist. I couldn't pronounce the damn word, let alone spell it, and I sure didn't have the slightest idea what it meant. Later at the hospital, an intern, thinking that I was the grief-stricken husband, stopped and explained, "Your wife has had a miscarriage. The membrane was punctured, causing the fetus to die, and when that happened, the uterus started to expel it." "You mean she gonna lose the baby?" I asked, ingenuously. The young intern stared at me for a moment to see if I was serious. Then, realizing that I was just young and dumb, he said, "She has lost the baby. Now we're trying to stop the hemorrhaging so that we don't lose the mother too." That rang a bell. The last thing I wanted to do was lose a good hoe. After waiting all this time for her to get streamlined, I didn't want to lose her now that she was ready for the track. When he saw the shock in my face, the intern walked away. I felt the bankroll in my pocket. It was $400 short because of the hospital bill. I shouldn't have paid the damn bill so fast. If she died and I hadn't paid the bill, all I'd had to do was deny being her husband and the hell with the bill. The thought of her dying rang in my mind, followed by the frightening knowledge of what a funeral would cost. That young girl died. For the next 2 hours, I sat there with my head in my hands. Whenever a nurse came by, she would try and console me. They must have imagined me as a grieving husband, for they were all very kind. They didn't realize that I was just as concerned about my $400 as I was about Boots. I don't want this misunderstood, so I'll try and explain it better. If Boots lived, the hell with the 400. But if she died, it was then a two-way blow. A good whore is always worth more than $400 to a good pimp. One of the nurses stopped and persuaded me to go home and get some rest. It didn't take much urging. I've been trying to figure out a good excuse for departing. That way, if something happened, I'd make damn sure they couldn't find me to stick with the burial expense. The next few days were days of worry. I called the hospital constantly. Most of the nurses knew my voice by now, and they kept me up on the latest. She was out of the worst of it, so I could start relaxing. This was really beautiful news. I knew that in the near future, I would be pimping again, and doing it sure enough big. 13. My thoughts were sharply interrupted by the ringing of the telephone. I picked up the receiver and listened to Boots' excited chatter. "Okay, Boots, just grab a cab. I'll have everything ready when you get here." Things had begun to get damn hot in this small town for us. I had moved from the hotel one jump ahead of the vice squad. Everybody on the track knew the police were looking for a light-skinned Negro with a pregnant woman. Now the search had moved to the hospitals. Some black-ass nigga had done some tall talking to the police, 'cause Boots had just been interviewed by 2 detectives. Removing my bankroll from under the pillow, I sat up and counted the money. There was still $300 in my roll. After paying Ray's mother $500, the cost of living in a motel the past few days was beginning to eat up my stash. A car pulled up outside. I pulled back the curtain and looked out. It wasn't Boots, but she wouldn't be long. As soon as she could steal some clothes, she would slip out of the hospital. It didn't take long for me to come to a solution to our problem. Put some highway between us and the police. Our bags were already packed, so I carried them out to the car and put them in the trunk. After that, I removed the silk scarf from around my head and combed my hair, then put our toilet articles in an overnight bag and laid it on the arm of a chair. I examined the room carefully, making sure I hadn't overlooked anything. The sound of a car stopping in front of my unit gave me a start. I peeped out the window cautiously. Boots was getting out of a cab. I rushed to the door and opened it and handed her the cab fare. We stood in the doorway and watched the cab until it turned out of the driveway. "Let's go, baby," she asked. "Ain't you gonna give me enough time to change clothes?" I removed the overnight bag from the chair. "You can change at some gas station on the highway, baby. Right now, we gonna get the hell out of here before we end up locked up tight." The mention of jail put wings on our heels. I didn't begin to relax till we got out of the city limits. The farther I got away from the city, the better I felt. After I got out in the country, I stopped at a gas station and filled the test room and changed clothes. When she came back to the car and lighted a reefer, I was at peace with the world. "Where we going, Daddy?" she asked, crossing her legs and leaning towards me. She rubbed the back of my neck, titillating me slightly. Driving with one hand on the wheel, I put my other one between her legs and rubbed her smooth thighs affectionately. Her long, shapely black legs seemed to vibrate with heat. She moaned softly and nibbled at my ear. "I can't do nothing for at least 4 weeks, Orson." "You can do something," I replied with a grin. "I ain't heard nothing about your head being dead." We both laughed raucously. Boots lit up another stick of weed and choked on the smoke. She coughed for about 5 minutes while I laughed all the while. When we reached Detroit, we were still in a jocular mood. Driving down Hastings Street was a thrill for me. The appalling deterioration of the tenements, gloomy and frightening to some people, filled me with joy. This was home to me. I didn't know any other way of life. The women huddled in the doorways, trying to find some measure of warmth and shelter, or plying their trade, didn't arouse commiseration in my heart. Only regret that they weren't in my stable. Boots' impression was altogether different from mine. I sure feel sorry for them bitches. I bet they done damn near froze in them doorways. Then she added, if it was me, I'd walk up and down instead of standing still. That way at least you might stay a little bit warm. Some of the more notable pimps could be seen sitting in their cars with the motors running. Sometimes a girl would run out of a doorway and get in a car. After sitting in the car for a few moments to get warm, she would run back to her doorway and continue working. I parked in front of Big Mama's. Most of the women standing in her doorway knew me. They began to yell before I got out of the car. Look at Horson, honey, driving a Cadillac and diamond down, Marge yelled, a healthy, coffee-colored woman. Boots got out of the car and waited for me at the curb. She put her arm around me and tossed her head up. Her attitude revealed beyond a doubt that I was her man, and that she was plenty proud of it. We walked up the stairs, arrogant and self-sufficient, without a care in the world. Big Mama, her face all aglow, smothered me in her huge arms. Horson, boy, why didn't you write us something? Here I've been worried to death over you, and you don't even bother to write. I finally extricated myself from her embrace. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed this big woman who cared so much about me. There was a lump in my throat, and I hoped that my eyes wouldn't betray me by glittering with tears. Come here, baby, I said to Boots, and meet my grandma. Boots was a big woman herself, but when Big Mama embraced her, she was completely lost in those enormous arms and bosom. Big Mama removed a bottle of wine from her refrigerator, and we sat around in the kitchen, drinking and reminiscing. Horson, Big Mama said, I still got your flat, boy. If you want to move back in, it's okay with me. I've been paying the rent and sleeping there sometimes. It does my poor heart good to get away from all these silly girls at times. I'm sick of hearing them talk about their damn pimps. My acceptance of the flat seemed to bring joy to the old woman's soul. I guess she just felt as if I were her wayward child. On my part, I not only felt, but knew that, except for Boots, she was the only person in the world who really cared about what happened to me. Quite a bit of time had elapsed since we entered the apartment. I stood up. Well, Big Mama, I said, I guess we had better be going. We've been traveling all morning and need some rest. Boots stood up and clutched my arm for support. The drinks and weed had finally caught up with her. That child sure can't drink much, can she? Big Mama asked. We've been drinking all morning, I replied. Plus, she just got out of the hospital today. If that's the truth, Horson, Big Mama said plainly, don't you go putting that girl to work too soon. You wait till she's ready, you hear? She followed us to the door. I mean that, Horson. If you need any money, boy, let me know. But you better make damn sure I don't hear about that girl out there working sick. A friendly warning followed us down the stairs. It was obvious that I wouldn't work Boots until she was in good shape. Amusing as Big Mama's threat was, it would benefit me to pay heed to it. If I put Boots on the streets, working, and Big Mama got the wire, she wouldn't hesitate to lock Boots up in her flat. Then there was nothing I'd be able to do about it. It was a sure bet that I wouldn't try kicking a door down. Anytime a man has been raised by a woman, his mother or not, there's certain liberties she can take with it that no other person in the world would dare do. By the time I got Boots in the car and was starting the motor up, someone knocked on the window. I glanced over my shoulder and saw Ape grinning at me. Reaching over Boots' sprawled-out form, I opened the car door and let him in. He waved back at the man he had been with as I pulled away from the curb. Ape had filled out quite a bit since I'd seen him last. He had been big before, but now he was huge. When he smiled, he still resembled a titanic gorilla. He didn't have but 2 teeth in the front of his mouth, and his lips were large and blubberish. When Boots got sober enough to look up at him, she tried to climb on top of my lap. "Watch out, woman!" I yelled. "What you gonna do, sit on the steering wheel?" I finally got to go to find some good reefer ate. He hesitated for a moment. "Billy got some light green horsing, while Eddie's smoke is good. Got a lot of sticks and stuff, family." He added, "Eddie's dealing out of the pool room. I don't care nothing about the sticks, Abe, if the smoke is boss. The smoke is mellow, baby," he answered. "The sweet thing about it is that it don't take no time to cut. When Eddie ain't at the pool room, he leaves his bag with the rack man." The pool room was on John R., so I turned down a side street. "Give him $15, Boots, out of my inside pocket. Cop me a half a can of weed, Abe, and pick up a couple of bottles of wine. We'll be around at the flat where I used to stay. Is that cool with you?" He took the 15. "And brother, what should I do if some of the mellow fellas want to come around to your pad with me? Cut 'em loose?" I laughed. The expression on his face revealed all he didn't say. I knew that he was wondering if I would cut all of my old partners loose now that I had a caddy and a whore. "Bring whoever you want, man. This is Horson, not John Flippengates." He stuck his hand back in the car. I leaned over and smacked his hand hard with mine. He yelled, "Mellow, mellow, mellow, I can dig it. I can really dig where you coming from, baby boy." He turned and catted towards the pool room. Boots looked at me, amused. "Baby, I can really tell that you're at home." 14. Empty wine bottles and overflowing ashtrays littered my apartment. For the past 2 weeks, our flat had become an open house, with wild parties continuing for 3 or 4 days without stopping. Since Friday, I'd promised myself that come Monday morning, the party would end. At long last, I'd got the last drunk started down the stairs. It had taken over an hour to get rid of all of them. But now, I could sigh with relief. Now, with the dawn breaking through the early darkness, I watched from my window the working men of the neighborhood preparing to depart for work. Milton's father, dirty as usual, stood in the street beside his car, talking to one of his neighbors. I watched him with disdain. His coveralls were grimy with filth. The old model car he drove matched its owner in shabbiness. My gaze flickered to my Cadillac. There was a feeling of triumph inside of me. I wasn't even half his age, and I already accomplished more than he ever would. Milton's mother could look down her fat nose at me if she wanted to pretend, but we both knew who had the sweetest end of the stick. Exultation overcame me as I turned and watched Diane dumping ashtrays. With my chest pushed out with pride, I walked over to the bedroom and opened the door. Boots and Vera were both laid out, side by side. They had danced so much over the past few days that they were just worn out. "Diane, why ain't you in bed getting some rest, girl?" I asked quietly. "You know I'm sending you to work later on today." She looked up from her cleaning and smiled shyly. "I just want to clean this mess up a little, Daddy," she answered innocently. A good pimp should try and know what his whores are thinking. Sometimes you would be put in an awkward spot, but most of the times you can guess just about what they have on their mind. "Quit lying, bitch," I replied coldly. "I know the only reason your lazy ass is up, faking like you're working, is on the slim chance that I gave you some meat this morning when I go to bed." Her eyes dropped, and she tried to look rejected, but just as quickly she rushed over and hugged me. "You gonna do a little something for me this morning, ain't you, Horson?" This was an ideal time to act chilly, but my defense was weakening. She was light chocolate, and her skin was as smooth as a baby's ass. When she smiled and looked up at me with her big bedroom eyes, I couldn't refrain from taking her in my arms and kissing those tender lips. As she pressed her young body against me, I knew that fate had dealt me a terrible blow. I'd been gifted with a tender dick. Bending over, I caught her legs and carried her towards the other bedroom. Her body had the smell of fresh roses, and her arms around me had the same effect as alcohol to the senses. When our bodies met, a shock of electricity went through my mind. We were caught up in the passion of youth, and my excitement exceeded all bounds. Later, with Diane snuggled against me gently snoring, I shuddered with horror at the thought of having to leave every morning for a job. I'd never had a job, and because of my environment and training, plus my dexterity at getting money, employment was unnecessary. My stable was growing. My mind wandered to the other two girls in the house, Boots and Vera. Not that I had 3 girls. It wouldn't be long before I was the best young pimp in the city. Here I was, at 17, with 3 of the youngest, wildest, and fastest whores in the country. How sweet it was. Pimping really had its good points. With the passing of Christmas and the following holidays, I was in good shape for the new year. Boots was able to go back to work, so I stopped her from doing any more with me, because quite a few pimps would rather have a booster than a whore. But to me, at this stage of my life, I didn't want anything but a flat-backing whore. The neighborhood theater, which went by the name of Duke, used to put on talent shows every Saturday afternoon. Since I was too young for the bars, I'd dress my 3 ladies up, get the car washed, and make my grand appearance, amidst much head-turning and adulation from the young would-be pimps in the audience. Abe, with a few more of my old gang, would have 2 rows of seats saved down front for the selected ones in our crowd. My girls enjoyed the adulation as we walked slowly towards our seats. Our popularity was rising. The fastest young girls in the neighborhood would crowd down near our row, trying to catch my eye. This theater was to become the best establishment in the city for meeting potential prostitutes. One Saturday, while sitting down front, crowded in between many admirers, a group came out on the stage and swept the spotlight from me with their swinging arrangements. I stared in wonder at young Janet. She was still singing and getting better than ever. I watched her capture the crowd with song after song. The audience wouldn't let them leave the stage. Every time they tried to leave, the crowd would become so unruly that the owner would call them back on stage. After doing one more number, Janet must have decided to put a stop to the commotion herself. She came down off the stage, followed closely by the 2 girls who sang with her. She stopped in front of me and leaned over. "Horson, how about trying and getting us out of here?" she yelled in my ear. "Don't worry, baby," I said, standing up. "I can handle it," I replied with more confidence than I felt. The crowd was really yelling and kids were crowding into the aisle. I had grave doubts about whether I could get them out. One thing kept ringing in my mind, though. This young girl had "Star" written all over her, and I meant to shine bright in her eyes. Embracing Janet, I pulled one of her trembling girlfriends into my other arm. Catching Boots' eye, I yelled, "See if you can get Ape and some of the fellas to clear a path, baby." She nodded and ran over to him. With Ape and 5 more of the bunch in front of her, Boots started breaking through the crowd, with us right behind. With kicks and punches, they soon had kids climbing seats to get out of the way. Finally, we reached the protection of my car. All the girls piled in. I gave Ape enough cash for cab fare and some weed before driving off. "You can drop us off anywhere, Horson," Janet said quietly. I smiled and kept on driving. "I know you ain't gonna be rude enough to refuse an invitation to my place, Janet." She sighed and settled back against the seat, compelled to accept my offer by my apparent refusal to stop long enough to let them out. Within 30 minutes after our arrival, the capacity of my house was being tested. Teenagers were everywhere except the back porch, and that was only because of the cold weather. Janet sat down on the couch beside me. She was breathing heavily from continuous dancing. "This is the first time I've sat down since we got here," she laughed. "I've heard about some of the swinging sets you gave, Horson, but I didn't realize just how renowned you are. I'm glad you're really enjoying yourself, Janet. You seem so set against coming here that I figured you'd leave before everybody arrived." "Actually, I'm having a better time than I thought was possible, Horson." She touched my arm and gestured towards the dancers. "Seriously, though, Horson, just how long do you think this can go on?"
What
"What do you mean, baby?" The party? I asked, looking down into her large, serene eyes. Yielding to her female wiles, she laughed lightly and gave my arm a pinch. You know what I mean. These parties, prostitutes, you not working? How long, Horson, do you really think you can last? Noticeable as your Cadillac is, successful as pimping might be, you still don't have any solid foundation under you. It finally occurred to me that she was serious. Probably this was her way of letting me know that she would be available if I would give up the game. Naturally, I had no intention of ever giving up the game, but I didn't want to hurt her feelings. Listen, sugar, I said softly, name me one good job that I could get. Don't think about the caddy that I drive, or the diamonds that I wear, nor the silk suits that I look so good in. Just forget about those things and name me a decent job that I could get. She bit down on her lip for a moment. Well, she began, you probably have to go back to school for a while. She hesitated to see if I was taking this seriously before continuing. Then after you graduated, you could...
I want to go back to school.
She finished in a rush. Get all kinds of jobs. Be a little more precise, baby, I inquired of her, jokingly. She frowned and became very nervous. Well, let me...
Like, for real, I just want to go back to fucking school. I just want, not even go back to school. I want to go to school. I want where I'm at, Lane Community College. But... can't go to school.
Let me see, he said quietly. You could, become a policeman. I laughed harshly. At what police department, honey? One in China? No, Horson, it's the truth. I ain't joking. My mother read it in the papers this morning. She said they're hiring colored men for all kinds of jobs on the force now.
Nigga, I don't care.
Instead of being amused by her behavior, I was ashamed of myself. I realized...
Like, you can't even go and be a police officer with the intentions of being the good one. Like, I'm gonna be the one that's gonna be good, and I'm gonna hit me like... just... That's just not the job, okay? No. And no. Even if I never, ever, like, was a part of that life and stuff like that, and it was just like, I've never been in trouble, and, you know, from out the gate, I'm just career having, and as always, that would not be the the want to be. What do you want to be? Not that.
That she was so innocent, she believed I might give up my precious possessions for love. Horson, she said, her face shining with sincerity, there are many girls who would marry you and not care if you didn't make a whole lot of money at work. They wouldn't care if you had to sweep floors, wash cars, anything. Just as long as you were theirs, it wouldn't make any difference what you did. She was looking at me with so much tender love in her eyes that I tried to joke her out of the mood.
That's
You
cause
can
she
easily say that,
knows.
Janet, I said. I ain't seen none of these girls you keep talking about. Her eyes had tears in them as she stared up at me.
She really give a fucks about.
Just look at me, Horson, she said. I'd gladly be your wife, but never your whore. After quite a circular route, there it was, out in the open. I had tried to keep the naked truth of her feelings from coming to light, but now the cards had been spread on the table, face up. She seemed so lovely, sitting beside me, that the thought of Luke...
But when you in that party, in that point in your life, and in your life where you don't understand these things. These things mean, huh? What? times that you experience things along the line of experiencing things that you one day get to sit and be like, oh, damn, that was a fuck up. Fuck. That's what I was supposed to. Fuck. That was a fuck up. You did, because at that time, when certain things come across you have you haven't reached the age of ready, or I don't know. There's so many ways, different ways you could say it, but yeah, god damn it.
Losing her was like taking a liquid bath with loneliness. I knew that my answer would hurt her. Even while I wanted to spare her pain, my customary glibness vanished. To me, the sound of my voice was harsh and sharp. Janet, I wouldn't be a flunky to the white man for you or the Virgin Mary. Car washing, truck driving, or working in some honky's factory is out of the question for me. Wait, I said, and grabbed her arm to prevent her from leaving. If my mother had left me enough money to set up a business or something, things would have been different. But since this didn't happen, the only way I can get big money without selling drugs is to manage sporting ladies. She listened to my raving until I was finished, then removed my hand from her arm. Goodbye, Horson, she said bitterly. Again, I wish you all the happiness in the world. Instead of following her, I watched her walk quickly to the door and leave. If there was one thing I disliked, it was to watch a woman cry, and I knew she was crying. Trying to maintain my air of composure, I turned.
You motherfuckers, bro, with that motherfucking that teardrop out your eye shit. 'Cause I'm telling you, boy. I'm a mama's boy with 2 sisters, and I'm the oldest. So, if y'all knew how much my life revolved around fuck these dang women. Oh my lord. But the worst thing, yeah, oh my goodness. Ooh. And the coldest part about it is when y'all be on bullshit with it. Like, for real, bruh. My niggas, do y'all know what I'm talking about, bruh? Like she just be whatever, and you just be like, oh, or if you just see and you just be like, it's that lion nature, nigga. You see something wrong with it, nigga. What's the problem? What you need? What's going on? So you got to block that shit the fuck out, 'cause bruh, you just be seeing the little kitty come here. She's a motherfucking possum. Nigga, this motherfucker was playing dead, nigga. That's the thirst traps. Them be the thirst traps, bro. Them you get. That's why a lot of niggas got the heart turned cold, bro. Cause these women, bro, there's so much shit on this thing that it just I be wanting to have me thinking thoughts.
Turned and examined the crowded room. Boots dropped down in the vacant seat. She patted me on the cheek. Don't worry, Daddy. You miss one shot, you get another, she added. While you was talking to Janet, that light-skinned girl over there, asked me if I'd mind having her for a wife-in-law. Coppin' was just that simple. My fourth girl came to me just like that. I stared at her without too much interest. Boots' sharp remark brought me back out of the clouds. What you looking so mournful about, Horson? I know it ain't over that skinny-ass Janet. But all she could do is sing to the tricks, 'cause she ain't got enough ass to stand no heavy pounding. I whirled around to give her a chilling rebuke, but her eyes were deadly cold, unflinching. Her voice dripped with venom when she spoke. Whores go with pimps, Horson. Barbers go with manicurists. And square bitches go with square niggas. She pivoted on her heels and walked across the crowded floor. Her back was straight, her head held high. With the coming of summer, my stable...
Like, cut on Seetha, man, and it bothers me, because I swear I don't know where I see it at. I forgot where I see it at. But, nigga, I'm sure there's some other niggas that didn't. Nah, fuck no. If I came up with the shit first, but Binky, no. We used to be mobbing, man. I switched shit up, bro, because everybody was always like niggas are squares, you know, them niggas are some squares. And so, like, where I'm originally from, Fairfield, California, the diss name for it, you know, other motherfuckers, like, you'll hear it you can hear it in a Be Legit song. I didn't listen to Be Legit for years because of that. I don't even remember the name of the fucking song. One of them songs, I think it's on the Hemp Museum. But that nigga said something, tell the truth, you ain't nothing but a, you's a square built nigga. To tell the truth, you ain't nothing but a square field nigga. Cause that's what they call Fairfield, Squarefield, if they got hatred for it. Nigga, like, fuck out of here or whatnot. But nigga, I was like, nigga, this square life, bro. Circles. Nigga, y'all niggas are circles, bro. We squares, bro. Cause niggas trying to switch it up and live a square life. Squares is they're doing good. They're happy. They enjoy life. They go boating and camping and hiking and you know, travel and, you know, are fucking married and have like hella cars and all that shit. Like, that's fucking square life. Like, it's fucking great. It's just, you know, like, fuck yeah. But I had tried to, you know, flip that shit. Like, niggas, we, you know what I'm saying, this is the square life, man, because we got shit locked, man, all four corners, man, you know what I'm saying. Can't push a nigga over. Push a nigga over, you know what I'm saying, it's just gonna stop, you know. Circles, y'all keep rolling, y'all can't, so forth. And then hell years later, but not too long ago, I came across some shit, and I guess it was like Square Life Entertainment or Square Life TV or some shit. Like, hell, man, bro, motherfuckers just be taking my shit, bro. Anyway,
Lavore stayed anywhere between 6 and a dozen good prostitutes. Pimpin' was good, and my bankroll continued to swell. At times I would hear reports about Janet singing at different places, but I made it a point not to go anywhere that I might run into her. For some reason, she stayed in my mind, no matter how many different women I slept with. As the summer wore on and my stable grew, I tossed myself into one party after another and started trying to teach myself to take the bitter with the sweet. 15. I awoke Monday afternoon with a splitting headache. My mouth was dry and my eyes were bloodshot from too much entertaining without sleep. I reached over one of the ladies in my bed and removed the last stick of weed from the night table. Before I could finish smoking the joint, Boots opened the bedroom door and walked in. Her sharp glance briefly lingered on the two sleeping forms I was lying between. "Parson," she said, "why don't you get them lazy bitches up and on the track? Shit, they ain't done nothing but pop their fingers and shake their ass since Friday night." Before replying, I sat up in the bed and inhaled deeply on the tiny cocktail between my fingers. "Bitch," I replied coldly, "until you grow a pole, you lead the pimping of me." Boots put her hands on her hips and leaned provocatively towards the bed. "Yes, sir, Master Sir," she said sardonically. Amused at her answer, I climbed out of the bed and stretched. Since the miscarriage, Boots had developed into one fine bitch. You couldn't have paid one of my other whores to speak to me in such a flip manner, but Boots knew that she was my main lady, so at times she acted just like a black queen. And to me, that's just what she was. "Since I'm up now, I guess I'll take a hot bath," I said. Boots hurried over to the dresser and took out a large towel. "Parson, I went over to the hotel like you said, Daddy, but I couldn't get the top floor like you wanted. It was already rented out, so I rented a suite on the second floor. How much did that one rent for?"
Like, sometimes they don't be understanding that gentlemen to all, at all. Like, number one, for you fellas, if you don't know and don't understand, a gangster, a true gangster, is a gentleman at all times, nigga, at all times. And it ain't, it's fuck a bitch, but, at the same time, you be a gentleman at all times, man. But at the same time, gentlemen at all times, though, you or her, so you, can't nobody fuck with it. Ain't nobody, you get a different level of where you bitches, they get treated like shit on top, like it ain't nothing. I'm shocked because I'm trying. It's not like that no more. It's not supposed to be nothing at all in that type of, but memories a little bit.
I asked sharply. She hesitated for a moment. $30 a day, Daddy, but I didn't pay but a week's rent on it. She rushed her words out, afraid of my reaction. More from habit than anger, I yelled, "Bitch, dumb bitch, ignorant bitch, did it ever occur to you that I might not want the suite on the second floor?" I walked out, leaving her to stare after me dumbfounded. Pushing the bathroom door open, I stopped at the sight of another one of my whores. "Damn!" I exclaimed irritably. "When you get finished, Jean, run me some bath water." Before slamming the door, I added, "Get some spray, or either burn some goddamn incense in there, and please mix some water with it." The girls in the kitchen burst out laughing. I stared at the women preparing breakfast until silence greeted my smothering glance. Boots came quietly into the room and put on a stack of records. "Any of you bitches got some reefer here? Set it out for Daddy," she ordered. Diane, small, thin, with features that seemed to have been carved from a bronze statue, danced out of the kitchen. She held up 2 joints proudly. "Here, Daddy." Her voice belied her small frame with its deep sensuality. Her large hazel eyes twinkled as she held out the weed. Without commenting, I removed the reefer from her outstretched hand and watched her dance back into the kitchen. If all my girls had the vim that Diane displayed at all times, my pimping would be a relief. Next to Boots, she was the best moneymaker in my stable. Jean came out of the bathroom. She was almost as tall as Boots, but that was where the comparison ended. Where Boots was dark, Jean was light, with yellow teeth full of gaps. Ordinarily, I wouldn't have accepted her in my stable, because she was lazy and virulent. At the time she chose me, I was just beginning my stable. She came to me after ripping off 300 from a trick. I finished off the joint I'd started before traipsing off to my waiting bath. The mellow weed, plus the hot bath, eliminated my slight irritation. Living in a house full of women had its drawbacks, but I found it much more rewarding than living in a house without any women. Slipping deeper into the tub, I splashed water up on my chest and shoulders. With the rental of the suite, I would eliminate the problem of some of the worrisome women in my stable. When I moved out, I reasoned, I wouldn't take but Boots and Diane with me. My meditation came to an abrupt end with the entry of Diane. She closed the bathroom door behind her, and by the time I turned to see who it was, she had slipped out of her duster and leaped into the tub, naked. Now, I have heard many people speak of how wonderful it is to make love in the bathtub, but to me, ain't nothing happening with it. First of all, I don't enjoy a woman bathing with me. And as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to having sex with a person in a tub, I think it's foolish. As small as Diane was, she still hurt my legs when she sat on my lap.
Hold on, fuck that. Ain't nothing like taking a shower with your lady, man. You know what I'm saying? Because, bruh, fuck that. The ones that make you take a shower with them, like, babe, I'm about to take a shower, come on. Because she just want to wash your back and she just hit you. The fuck you.
I pushed her up, so she turned around and sat down in the bathtub facing me. She was so full of mischief that she made me grin in spite of my attempts to
Why did I just
absurd.
do that dumbass shit?
I put my knee between her legs and began to probe for the right assertive manner. She looked up at me and groaned enthusiastically. Oh, Daddy. Daddy, you sure know how to make it good to me. Before the sound of her vibrant voice descended to its normal tones, Boots had shoved open the door and stepped in. She stood in the doorway, glaring, with the reef I'd given her hanging from the side of her mouth. Diane broke the silence. "Oh, you don't own this dick, bitch," she yelled. "So try putting an egg in your shoe and beat it." Boots ignored her and came over and sat on the side of the bathtub. "Little hot cunt heifer," she said. "Why don't you get your ass out of there so that Horson can enjoy his bath?" The weed had put me in such a mellow mood that I just sat back and enjoyed the byplay. Diane snorted. "Huh, whore? I like your nerve. There you sit on your wide ass smoking my reefer and talking shit." Before Boots could retort, Diane followed up her verbal attack with action. Using the palms of her hands, she began scooting water in Boots' direction. Boots took to her heels while I tried to save my towel from getting soaked. Cursing, I climbed out of the tub. It would be my luck to get hooked up with a bunch of crazy bitches. Diane jumped out of the tub and snatched the towel from me. Resigned to my fate, I stood docile while she rubbed me down. True to her impetuous nature, as soon as she got below my waist, she began to act up. Using the towel with an imp's delight, she took to her task vigorously. I laughed at her unruly behavior, but before I became too aroused, I decided to put a stop.
I don't know if that new follower can hear me, but I appreciate you. I think that was on the YouTube. Yeah, you got Anthony the God. What's up with you? Pinkies up, man. I appreciate the follow, boss.
To it. I slapped her wrists, but it didn't do any good. She just got a tighter grip. Trying to pry her hands loose was more difficult than trying to get free from an octopus. "Bitch!" I yelled. "Enough is enough. Turn my Jones loose!" Instead of obeying, she dropped to her knees and opened her mouth as though she were going to eat some rare delicacy. I grabbed a handful of her hair and pulled her head back. Only the sudden opening of the door stopped me from slapping her. Boots charged in, carrying a bucket of water. Diane uttered a scream and scrambled behind me. I leaped sideways, but I was too slow. Most of the cold water landed on me. I shook like a dog, shaking water from his fur. Boots turned and fled, and I leaped towards the doorway in hot pursuit, cursing every step of the way. Shrill, piercing shrieks greeted me as I ran bare ass into the living room. All of my women were sitting there, eating, and 3 other prostitutes that didn't belong to me had stopped in to roll up some reefer. My predicament was embarrassing even for me. There I stood, in the middle of the floor, naked as a newborn baby, with no less than 10 women evaluating my prodigious instrument. I looked down unconsciously. Because of the vicious tugging by Diane a few moments ago, I had nothing to be ashamed of. Gathering up as much dignity as the occasion would allow, I ambled towards the bedroom, amidst catcalls, much laughter, and sly insinuations. One girl exclaimed. "I see why Horson got all your hoes in his stable now." Another one cracked. "I don't know what you got between your legs, but if I dreamed I took that much meat, I'd wake up with female trouble." Amidst much loud laughter, I slowly dressed, listening from behind the door to their frank appraisal of my merits. Once again I became aware of the fact that whenever a group of women got together, they discussed private sex matters much more openly than a group of men would. To a stranger, their conversation would have sounded vulgar, because they discussed oral sex as though it were a hat they had just purchased. But to me, their conversation was as normal as eating and sleeping. They were discussing their work, and the easy way of doing it. I hadn't turned 18 yet, and prostitutes were the only kind of women I had ever known. If someone had inferred that the life I led was quite different from the rest of society, I wouldn't have given it a second thought. From the factory workers I knew, and the ones I saw coming home from work, I didn't have a doubt in my mind as to my role in life. As far as I was concerned, there were 2 categories of people. One group consisted of tricks, and the other of players. And I knew I'd been born to play. I finished dressing and glanced in the mirror. My apparel consisted of black pants, a gold high-low shirt, and black alpaca sweater. The black alligator shoes set off my casual dress to perfection. I put on my diamond ring and took one last peek in the mirror, fixing my features in a cold, unruffled mask. I opened the bedroom door and stepped out onto my stage. All pimps must be actors to some degree. Not to act spells failure in their field. When a woman comes to your bed in the early morning hours with a fistful of money for you, you are forced to act. No matter how much you may detest this certain lady, you cannot allow your true feelings to show. Being aware of the possibility that she may have consumed a bucket of sperm in the course of a night, you don't display any aversion if she wants to kiss you. You descend into the bathroom with the Listerine and toothpaste. So instead of her ever becoming aware of your true nature, she only sees the part you act. Instead of scorn, she finds acceptance. Instead of hate, she finds her conception of love. Thus, many people believe that prostitutes are the biggest tricks of all. Closing the bedroom door behind me, I yelled, "Diane!" My voice was cold and harsh. "You and some of them other bitches clean up that water on the floor. Then you get Boots' clothes and your own packed. I'll be back for you in a little while." Fear leaped into her eyes. She searched my face for a clue, then turned and stared at Boots. Their eyes met, and whatever transpired seemed to relieve her. She was laughing as much as ever when Boots and I went out the door. 16. The following weekend, Boots and I drove up to visit Tony. He had grown quite tall with a swell of muscle in his forearms and chest. Wiry, but with more than an intimation of great physical strength in the young, cleanly built body. His face, with its deep-set black eyes and aquiline nose, showed the fierceness of his African heritage, tempered by the compelling beauty of a black starless night. His broad features burst into a genuine grin of happiness. "Damn, Horson, I done damn near gave up on seeing you until I got out." Without any embarrassment, he embraced me and crushed me against his broad chest. I had to blink to hold back the tears of joy that were filling up my eyes. The other inmates ignored their visits to watch us curiously. Just as suddenly as he grabbed me, he released his bear hug and swooped down on Boots. She uttered a startled yell before being swept off her feet. While swinging her back and forth as though she were a toy, he planted wet kisses all over her cheeks. "Damn it, girl!" His voice boomed out across the visiting area. "You better stay out the sun. You get any blacker, I'm going to disown you as being my sister." He winked in my direction, and I grinned. Knowing him as I did, I knew he had said it to embarrass the white people who had stopped visiting to watch us. Boots hadn't realized why he did it, so she kicked him sharply on the leg. He set her back down. "God damn you, Boots!" he swore, and then added quietly, "I was just showing the white folks we was true to form." The frosty glare disappeared from her eyes, and she smiled suddenly. "Well, just don't use me for any more of your demonstrations." Tony put his arm around my shoulder. "I don't see how you do it, Horson," he said, shaking his head at Boots. "Me not? I ain't gonna have nothing but white girls. They know their place. You show me a black girl, and I'll show you the most evilest, meanest, mule-headed woman God put on this earth." Glancing out the corner of my eye, I could see that Boots was steaming. She managed to control her temper until the visiting period was up. We were just about the last ones to leave, and all of Tony's friends who had had visitors joined us. The lush green lawn was almost free of people. Before, it had been full of running and screaming children, but now most of the lawn chairs were empty. A guard started towards us. Boots stood up. Yeah, Tony, I almost forgot to give you Jean's message," she said quietly. "She said—" Tony interrupted her. "What Jean you talking about?" "Don't try and act clever, nigga," Boots replied sharply. "She asked me to tell you that she wanted you to know that she sure liked that hot head you laid on her before you left the streets." The cold, harsh words fell on a silence like a void. For a moment, there was total stillness. Then Tony's friends broke out in laughter. Some of them laughed so hard they fell down and rolled over on the grass, holding their stomachs. Amidst the uproar, Boots stalked off towards the car. Tony stared after her in wonder. "That's what I call a dirty black bitch, Horson," he muttered angrily. I watched her feline grace until she entered the Cadillac. "Well, Tony," I said, amused, "looks like you got a lot of explaining to do to your friends, baby." He grinned. "That's a top-notch whore you got there, Horson. In fact," he continued soberly, "there's something about her that reminds me of Jessie." Later on, as I drove back to Detroit, his words stayed in my mind. I take my eyes off the highway and glance in Boots' direction. After catching me looking at her a few times, she asked, "You ain't mad with me about what I said about Tony, are you, Daddy?" Since Tony mentioned it, I could see some similarity between Boots and my mother, though Jessie had been slightly smaller. Both were tall, dark, beautiful black women with forceful personalities. Whereas Jessie had been quiet, content to live within herself, Boots was the opposite. She enjoyed the company of others, and when she was by herself, she became miserable. I roused myself from my thoughts as her voice penetrated my daydreams. "Yeah, baby," I said lightly. "Just you be careful who you say such things to, baby. 'Cause some niggas get awful mad when people infer that they go in the bushes." She slipped her arm over the back of the seat and laughed lightly. Her skirt inched up above her knees, and I put my arm in her lap. As we neared the city, I pulled her skirt up higher. and caressed her smooth thighs. I let Boots out of the car in front of the restaurant connected to the hotel so she could pick up some cigarettes. I parked the car and walked slowly back. The lavish hotel lobby was crowded with people sitting around and talking. Upon entering, I stopped and looked around casually. Boots came out of the side door of the restaurant without seeing me and started towards the elevator. There were 4 men sitting at a table playing cards, and one of them reached out and grabbed her arm as she went by. His voice came across the room to me, clear and sharp. "Hey, honey, what's your hurry?" he asked. "That young boy you got upstairs got too many girls to be worried about you." "That's my arm you happen to have hold of," she replied coldly. "Dig how cold she is," he said sarcastically. "Honey, you ain't cold, and that young punk you got for a man ain't got enough sense to tell you how to respect a man." A few of the whores and pimps sitting around began to laugh. I watched Boots with amusement. I knew she had a sharp wit, and I hoped that she could handle him. If she couldn't, I was pretty sure that I could. Boots' voice began to rise in anger. "I don't care what you say about my man. At least he don't have to sit out here in the lobby and molest other people's women." "You got it wrong, baby," the tall, thin card player said. "First of all, you ain't got a man. You got a boy. And second, you have to be a man to hang out down here." Boots laughed sarcastically. "You say my man is a punk, huh? Why don't you come upstairs and tell that to them 10 black whores here sleeping up there? Better yet, why not try and tell the 6 white whores, 3 bulldaggers and 2 punks, and 1 gold-toothed mule that looks like you, that he ain't a man?" The card player's friends laughed at a retort, but I noticed that he was getting mad. So I moved in. I grabbed the arm that he was holding Boots with. "If you don't mind, buddy," I said softly, "I'd like to see my woman go on about her business." "Sure, man, sure," he said, and with insolence slowly released her hand. He turned his back on me and started laughing and talking to his friends as though I didn't exist. As Boots took my arm, I could feel my temper mounting. "Next time one of these tricks stops you," I said loud enough for the whole lobby to hear, "you find out how much money the sissy is spending, baby, and if he ain't spending any money, don't waste any time with him." And then I added, as an afterthought, "You know how some freaks are, baby. They come just by holding a whore's hand." When the elevator stopped, I turned around before entering it and saw that 2 of the card player's friends were holding him in his seat. We entered our apartment and hugged up, laughing our heads off. The smell of burning hair was strong in the air. I could hear the chatter of many feminine voices coming from the kitchen. I sighed with resignation. Moving from my flat hadn't done any good. The girls just found an excuse to leave a dress or coat whenever they visited my penthouse, and before I knew it, they had just about moved in. Boots uttered my very thoughts. "Oh, Horson, every time I enter this suite, I'm overwhelmed by its beauty." "You should be," I answered. "For $30 a day, it should have a swimming pool in the front room." I walked into the lavishly furnished living room. The deep, blood-red wall-to-wall carpet felt plush beneath the $85 lizard skin shoes I was wearing. The carpet alone seemed to trumpet my arrival as an up-and-coming young pimp. "Horson?" I turned as Boots glided to a stop before entering the bedroom. "What, baby?" "I'm going to change into something more comfortable," she said. "How about twisting me up a joint?" "Okay, pothead," I said, grinning. "We didn't already smoke the matchbox since this morning, woman. But just for you, I'm going to smoke some more." "Oh, baby, you sure treat me good, don't you?" she said gaily. She dipped down in her bra and came up with a small brown envelope. I took the weed from her, and as she turned towards the bedroom door, I playfully slapped her on her wide ass. "Ouch, Horson!" I sat down on the white sofa and placed the envelope of marijuana on the coffee table in front of me. My eyes roamed around the room. The architectural design was typical of middle-class hotel suites around the country. However, whoever did the decor knew his business. Everything was ultra-modern. My fingers savored the smooth texture of the fine material covering the sofa as my mind received vivid impressions from an abstract oil painting on the wall in front of me. I rolled a stick of weed for myself. Relaxing against the soft cushions, I enjoyed the mellow feeling of contentment that flowed through my body. I realized that, with a house full of women, I should value this stolen time. To be alone for just a few moments gave me a tranquility that was indeed rare. I never before seen a wall painted black. That is, not in a hotel. It complemented the blood-red carpet. Turning my head, I took in the enameled white wall, with its louvered door through which Boots had walked. At the far end of the room, set between the flat black wall and a mild orange-colored one, was a Nero reclining couch. Placed between this and another like it, both upholstered in leopard skin, sat a large palm plant that appeared to be growing out of the carpet. By a large window, behind the sofa I sat on, stood a floor-to-ceiling cylindrical lamp. It seemed to be made of frosted glass, with small curlicue designs etched into its surface. Looking up, I felt a strange sensation as the zebra patterns on the ceiling gave an illusion of melting together. To me, this was a hip joint. I stood up and walked over to the Grundig stereo, sitting below the abstract painting. As I turned on the switch, the sounds of violins filled the room. Although I'm strictly a blues and jazz fiend, the mellow sound of strings in that room seemed appropriate, so I left it on. "Horson, what the hell is that on the box?" Boots asked me from the opened bedroom door. "It's music, woman. You think the whole world listens to nothing but Jimmy Smith and Little Richard?" "Oh, Daddy, I was just asking." I walked back to the sofa, and taking some zigzag papers from my coat pocket, sat down and opened the envelope, pouring its contents of dark green reefer onto the long, glass-topped coffee table. Boots walked over and said in a sexual voice, "Lace me up, Daddy." "Turn around." I stood up and made a bow in the 2 silk strings hanging from the back of a transparent, hemmed-in mink, pink silk negligee. "Boots, call down the room service and had him send up a 5th of Johnny Walker Red and 6 bottles of beer." As she walked towards the telephone, she reminded me of what a top-notch whore should look like. The mink that ran around the hem of her negligee bounced softly from her half-exposed buttocks. They were large for her size, but without flaws. Her dark thighs and legs were second to none I had seen, and she drew tricks like bees to honey. After reseating myself, I began to roll a few joints. "And a bucket of ice," I called after her. She stuck her tongue out at me, but relayed my message to the desk. After hanging up, she came over and lowered herself to the carpet in front of me. I lit up a joint and handed it to her. "Now be good, honey," I said, and pried her inquiring hands loose. "Daddy, I'm always good," she said, and then started doing what I knew she would do. I took the joint from her hand and leaned back on the sofa. Smiling up at me, she unzipped my pants and began fumbling around for the separation in my shorts. "Why don't you just ask me to take them off?" I asked. "It's more fun this way," she said, and after finally getting a grip on what she was after, she began squeezing and pulling gently, then lowered her head. I felt the warmth of her mouth move up from my thighs and settle deep into my stomach. Each movement of her tongue sent frantic sensations up and down my spine until I didn't think I could stand it anymore. Through the pounding of my heart and the roaring in my mind, I heard a metallic sound. The door opened, and Diane walked in. "God damn!" she yelled. "Every time I look around, that bitch got a yard of dick down her throat." Diane pulled her wig off and walked across the room. "Damn, I'm tired," she said as she sat down. She stared at Boots for a few moments. "Damn, bitch, ain't you got no shame, cum-loving whore?" Boots stopped and looked around. "Why, Trav? You jealous?" "You damn right I'm jealous, dick-loving whore. I've been out catching tricks all day, and you sit up here with your black ass sucking all the life out of Horson. Well, don't worry, little white girl. You'll get your chance. Diane capped. I know damn well I get my chance. Have you ever turned the meat loose, black-ass cow? I stood up and straightened up my clothes. Diane looked down at Boots and removed a large roll of bills from her bra and laid them on the coffee table. With her last remark aimed at Boots, she said, with tricks outside riding bumper to bumper, all this sorry bitch could catch would be a cold. She turned on her heel and walked into the bedroom. Boots got up off the floor and sat down on the couch. Daddy, I was thinking you might have some trouble out of that fella that was down in the lobby. I stared at her silently for a few moments before answering. The only thing that nigga better do, baby, is try to get along with me. 'Cause I ain't letting nobody put no static in my game. The telephone rang, and Boots answered it. I'd made it a point never to answer a phone whenever there was a woman in the house, because sometimes tricks called, and if a man answered, they would hang up. Boots waved the receiver towards me. It's for you, Daddy. I took the phone out of her hand. Who is it, baby? It sounds like Dot. I frowned at the receiver. Dot was one of my most recent cops. Ever since I'd had her, she seemed always to get into difficulties. What is it, honey? I asked into the phone. Her voice came over the line, shaking and scared. Orson, I'm sorry about not being on the track, but my brother's seen me standing on the corner and made me go home with him. I shouted into the phone. Bitch, you mean to tell me that your brother is the reason that my trap money is going to be shitty? But Orson, he seen me on the corner and made me go home with him. I snarled. Tell the real whore. I don't hear no baby screaming in the background, so I know you ain't over to his house now. So just what is the reason? The real deal, bitch. Just why are you presenting this weak shit to me? Is your money funny, ho? Or have you been out yarding somewhere? She started to cry into the receiver. Daddy, I'm not lying. I had to climb out the bedroom window to get away. Bitch! I exploded. I should make you go back to his house and walk out the front door. Ass bitch. Don't you realize that when you out there on the corner, you represent me? And what you do reflects on me? Now, how do you think I'm going to feel if people get to talking about my woman had to climb out of a window because her brother didn't like what she was doing? But Orson, didn't nobody see me come out the window? Shut up, bitch, and listen. It ain't the idea that anyone saw you come out the window. It's the fact that I know you came out the window. My whore had to climb out of some goddamn window because her wine-haired brother took her home. I interrupted her reply.
Listen,
just shut up and listen.
Calm down, my nigga. God.
But I ain't. I'm going to give you another chance. Now, I want you to get your ass back up on that track and get my money right. If your brother should come back up there looking for you, don't hide. Just tell him that you're up there taking care of my business. And I don't want him blocking my game. I continued, if he should take you home anyway, don't climb out my windows, bitch. Just walk out the front door. Now, if you don't think you can handle this, I'll take you back over to your brother's house and talk to him myself. Before she could hang up mad, I smoothed her feelings so she wouldn't go to work mad. Listen, honey, all young girls make mistakes when they first go to work. So don't feel bad about it. This all goes along with the making of a good whore. If whoring was easy, every woman you see would be out in the streets with her legs in the air. But it takes a certain kind of woman to be a good whore. So most of them back up from it because they be lazy, and it just ain't in them. She was quiet for a moment. Daddy, I'm going to be a good whore, ain't I? Sure you are, baby. But it just takes hard work. Now don't forget, I don't want to see you getting in your father's car if he ain't spending no money. You understand? She laughed. Orson, you wouldn't want me to trick with my daddy, would you? Not really, honey. I grinned, then added, unless he was going to spend a show enough big buck. Then I think you could handle it. She was still laughing when I hung the phone up. Boots picked up a joint from the coffee table. Pimp hard, Daddy, pimp hard. I laughed coldly. Yeah, baby, I said, and looked at my watch. You can start getting ready for the track, too, Miss Fine. Diane came into the room with the bellboy, who was bringing up the whiskey and beer I...
Future daughter, you will never date a nigga that read this book. If he knows this book exists,
I'd ordered earlier.
She will never read this book.
She was wearing a pair of very tiny panties with a see-through bra. The bellboy, who was about 40, couldn't keep his eyes off her. The hallway door opened, and a troop of my women came in. They were all scantily dressed, and the bellboy didn't know which one to look at. His eyes were going back and forth like pinballs. The girls, noticing his excitement, began to harass him. Diane stepped up and took control. "Honey, you saw me first, didn't you? So why you making all them eyes at them sluts? Don't you think I can handle your problem, honey?" He shook his head up and down, dumbly, and she took his hand and steered him into the bedroom. In less than 5 minutes, he was back onto the bedroom, looking around sheepishly. Diane escorted him to the door. "Be sure to ask for me the next time you come up, big fella. Here," she said sweetly. As soon as he left, Diane pulled a $10 bill out of her bra and twisted her hips provocatively as she crossed the living room. "You see, girls, what a good whore gets? He paid for the drink that you all are trying to consume, and plus, he tipped me this for being so sweet." The girls laughed and talked and gossiped until I interrupted. "Well, ladies, the party is over, and I know you have all had your kicks, but the time has come for you all to catch some tricks." I settled back on the couch with Diane in my arms and watched them prepare to go to work. It still took better than an hour before they had all dressed and departed, leaving just Diane and me in the suite. 17. Diane helped me out of my car, and the early morning chill wind helped to sober me up. She'd come down to Carl's after-hours club and waited patiently until I'd finished gambling and drinking. The sun was just coming out as we staggered down the street. By the time we reached the hotel, I got control of myself enough so that I could walk without any help. The lobby was deserted at this time of the morning, except for the night clerk and a couple of fags. When the elevator went up, I had to fight to hold down the hamburgers I had eaten earlier. The sound of loud music reached us before we could even get the apartment door open. "Sounds like somebody else is up besides us, Daddy," she said. I pushed open the door, and the sound of loud jazz blasted me in the face. For a few moments, the women's faces in the room were a blur, but I finally managed to focus in on them. And what I saw came as a surprise. Boots and a tall white blonde were dancing together. They were both about the same height, and they were swaying to the beat of the music with an intimacy that suggested a strange relationship between two women. Boots broke away when I entered. Diane poured coal oil on the fire. "Don't you stop belly rubbing just because we showed on the set." "It ain't what you think it is, bitch," Boots said. "Horson, this is Jerry," she explained. "I met her downstairs, and she wanted to know who you were, so I told her to come on up and meet you. Oh, yeah, I also told her that you didn't have girlfriends, only whores, so she brung her clothes. Oh, yeah," she added. "She belonged to that damn nigga that's always downstairs bothering us whenever we come in. You know, the one you had some words with yesterday." So, out of spite, I let her stay. Jerry was 24 years old, and the first white girl I'd ever had. Not really having any connections for a white girl, I allowed her to lie around the pad for about a week before deciding to let Boots take her down to my whorehouse on Hastings. The colored tricks went mad over her. It lasted exactly 1 week before the police caved the door in, taking all the whores in the house to jail. I knew that my whorehouse was busted before the police came out the door with the girls. I joined the crowd, like a fool, and watched the police load the cursing women into police cars. Before I could leave the crowd, 2 tall white vice officers walked up from the rear of the crowd and arrested me. Another group of my girls were in the crowd, and they caused one hell of a commotion before some more police busted them. They put me in a car with 3 of my girls from the crowd. I yelled out the car window to some friends, "Why don't you get in touch with Big Mama and have her get the bondsman on the case?" This was the beginning of the end. From here on out, my luck changed. I've been enjoying the sweet without the bitter. Now my turn had come to start paying dues. Everybody made bond, except the white girl. They held her as a witness for the state. The rest of my girls were fined $50 for loitering in a house of ill repute, while they charged me with pandering and Boots with aiding and abetting. My bond was set at $5,000, while Boots was set at $3,000. We both came out on bond at the same time. The lawyer socked it to me for a big fee, and my bankroll began to dwindle at a shocking pace. It turned out that this was Jerry's first arrest. Because of this, the police contacted her parents out in Bloomfield Township. When they found out that their precious daughter had been staying with a black man, they went through the roof of the police station. With the police browbeating her and her parents screaming at her, she became a cooperating witness for the police. We stayed out on bond for 2 months before going back to court and being found guilty. 1 week later, we went back to court for sentencing. My lawyer promised me probation because of my age. "Don't worry about a thing, Mr. Jones," he said. "4-year-old woman. If anything," he told me jokingly, "the judge should give her 90 days for teaching a young boy bad habits." So, the day of my sentence, I went to court snug as a bug. Between me and my lawyer, we had a tacit agreement. Boots was in a cross. I figured she would get about 6 months, but she could stand it better than me. The first one the judge passed sentence on was Boots. He looked down from his bench at us as though we had crawled out from under a rock. He gave her 3 to 5 years in the Detroit's Women's House of Correction. Before he could announce mine, I knew the cross had gone down, with me caught in the middle. He said something about my behavior and also mentioned the cutting I had done on the girl's face last year. Then he finally lowered the bomb. He sentenced me to from 6 to 7 years. Instead of probation, I got prison, and I had known that white girl 2 weeks. I was in a state of shock when they led me from the courtroom. I stayed in the county jail for 2 weeks, waiting to be shipped out to Jackson Prison. This was to make me be glad to get to prison, because couldn't nothing be worse than a county jail. We had to sleep on mattresses on the floor because there wasn't enough bunks to go around. The food was just enough to get by on, and the weak didn't get theirs. Bowls were fought over just because some men wanted another piece of meat. The weak, the scared, the timid made it a point to give their meat to one of the stronger inmates. This way, they had someone to protect them on the ward, not only because of the food, but because rape was a way of life when the lights went out at night. On my first day in the county jail, I had 3 fights before the night was over. After that, the wild young boys on the ward gathered around me, and we started a wolf pack. If one fought, we all fought. In less than 1 week, we ruled the ward. My day finally arrived. With 2 other prisoners, we were handcuffed together and loaded into the rear seat of an auto. Our hands were cuffed tightly behind us, and leg irons were firmly secured to our ankles. One long chain went through each man's leg iron, securing all 3 of us together. In the 2-hour drive to the prison, I watched the passing scenery with unseeing eyes. When the car pulled up in front of the gate, I stared at the huge walls surrounding the penitentiary. I watched men in blue uniforms trimming the grass and hedges in front of the institution. There were no guards visible around them. I would learn later that these were trustees, and it would be many years before I would reach this status. Like many black men before me, I realized that it was ridiculous to worry about that which you couldn't change.
But, when you do get the mild worker job, though, you get to stay out. And you get to be the first one to turn the TV on, bruh. You get an extra couple bags for them sandwich. Then when you work in the kitchen, Never want to do that shit again.
I was confronted with the problem of making my mind accept the fact that I would be behind these forbidding gray walls until my sentence was served. It is typical of man's nature that he can adjust to almost any environment. Prison life was no different. The only large problem was the absence of any females. Some men even adjust to this. I met men who had been sentenced to life imprisonment, and they'd adapted to this abnormal condition. Many of these men went so far as to abstain from indulging in relationships with the various homosexuals.
I'm going crazy now, and I'm on the streets. Don't do that. You can't adapt to it. What? Never. No, girls. None. Never again. Ever. What? Never. I need to see some roll your neck and just and like it's like for real. I don't want just niggas. Just excuse you. Forever? Forever? Never ever. No.
Who abounded in prison, while others quickly accepted this as the new way of life and fell in love with one of the boy girls. After we got out of the car, they marched us inside. Here we undressed, leaving our civilian clothes behind and putting on the prison blues. Many of us would wear these clothes and similar ones for many years before we would have another chance to wear civilian clothes.
And bitch, you want me to commit crimes to prove my love to you? And if I get caught for this crime, I got to be forever? Never ever. No.
From there, we were marched to 7 Block, a place in Jackson Prison that was used for quarantine. We were isolated from the rest of the prison population. We stayed in quarantine from 1 to 3 months, waiting to find out where we would be sent. I stared around the large brick building with trepidation. It was 4 floors high, and on each gallery there were single cells. As I followed my guard up to the 3rd gallery, I noticed most of the cells had men in them. The men whistled at us as we passed. Some of them made smooching sounds with their lips. At first, it was unbelievable to me. The thought of spending the next few years locked up in one of these cages was beyond my comprehension. The guard stopped and opened one of the cages with his key. He waited impatiently until I walked in. Then he slammed the door behind me. As I sat down on the small cot in the cell, I realized for the first time what prison meant. This was the big house, and I had made it at the ripe old age of 17. As I lay there on my bunk, staring up at the ceiling, I counted on my fingers how many years I would have to do. Since it was then 1957, I figured the soonest I could get out would be sometime in the early 60s. Since there was no getting around it, and I would have to serve the time, I made my mind up at that moment that I wouldn't take any shit from anyone. I knew there was only 2 kinds of people in prison. Either you were a man, or a punk, or too old to have to worry about it. Since I was so young, I knew I would have to worry about it. So I made up my mind to be one of the pushers, and not one of those that got pushed. The first weeks in prison I spent receiving blood tests and shots. After that, we were given lectures on prison life and constant warnings not to borrow anything from other inmates. We were let out of our cells to eat 3 times a day, then put back in and locked up. The only time we were allowed out was when we were on call or taking a shower at night. Once a week, we were allowed to see a movie. Then they broke all the doors and we were let out to go downstairs and sit in the dining room. We had to remain silent at all times during this outing, but the men and young boys quickly learned how to talk without their lips moving. At the movie, when the lights went out, it became a whorehouse. Punks went to work with their hands and lips. The men who stood on the side, because of lack of seating, would have sissies stand in front of them with slits in the seams of their pants. Before the morning chow line would begin, all the slit pants would have been repaired. After I'd been in quarantine a month, my first problem came up. While we were lined up to take a shower, the man behind me patted me on my ass. I knew it wasn't an accident because a light giggle went up and down the line. I ignored it. He did it again. I waited until after I'd taken my shower, and when we lined up to march back to our cells, I got behind the joker who had thought he was doing something clever. He was an older man who had done time before. At night, I'd heard him talking across the cells. I was next door to him. He made a few remarks earlier about me, but I had ignored them. Now, he was pushing his luck. As we walked down the gallery, I rolled my towel up so that I could use it to choke with. It was still bulky, but I knew it would damn well serve my purpose. I caught him from behind and put my knee in his back. With both hands, I twisted the towel tighter and tighter. When the guards came running up and started to force me to turn him loose, in a last attempt to finish what I had started, I tried to kick him off the third gallery. For fighting, I was put in the hole. I spent 2 weeks in there, and when I came out, I was assigned to the main prison. They thought I was too violent-natured to be allowed to serve my time around boys my age. Once inside the population, away from the restrictions of quarantine, I began to settle down. The everyday routine of prison life became acceptable. The few problems I had because of my age were quickly settled. The rumor that I would not only fight, but kill, if necessary, gave the dogs room for thought. There were too many soft marks inside the wall for them to go out of their way for me. And then I was considered a dog myself. The days ran into months, then the months into years. Boots and I corresponded with each other all the way through her prison bit. After her release, it was another story. When she sent me $10, I sent it back. In the letter I wrote her, I told her if that was all she could send, she needed it more than I did. When I had come to prison, I had brought $1 grand with me. Since then, Tony and Big Mama had sent money off and on. My prison account had over $2,000 in it after I'd been in prison for 4 years. After Boots released from prison, I received $300 from her in 1 year. With the arrival of Ape in prison, I found out that Boots had chose Tony. 18. With the passing of Christmas, my year was coming up. The parole board had given flop, but that didn't make any difference. I now had 4 months to go for discharge. Tony had come up to visit me twice in the past year, but each time he came, I'd refused to go to the visiting room. In my mind, I knew there was nothing he could tell me. He had my woman, and that was that. I'd left my jewelry and all my clothes for him when I'd gone into prison. That hadn't been...
For real, my niggas, if you don't know, if you ever end up in a situation where you in the county jail, you in wherever, nigga, like, yeah, and you got somebody who's, putting money on your books and so forth, stack that. And when they say that, don't worry about that. I'm gonna put the money on your books for you to get out with. That just adds to that. You know what I'm saying? If you put $100 on your books, nigga, take 20 of that. Take 10 buy your hygienes, 10 to buy your little suit or whatever, your little extras or whatever this and that, and nigga, stack that 80. Nigga, if she's putting money on your books every week or every 2 weeks, stack that shit, boy, and hustle for everything else. Like, nigga, figure out what your hustle is. Hustle, fill your commissary bucket, and eat that way. And then when you hop out, and this is for the niggas that don't know how, like ain't got no way, don't know what to do. Niggas that know what to do, you don't need my advice. You know what the fuck to do. Some niggas just look.
And enough. He took my woman. I didn't want the bitch back. If anything, I wanted to kill her. She could have chose anyone other than my only friend. I was not the only one who was mad at them. Big Mama, before she died, had borrowed Boots from her trick house, and some of my old friends who had just left the streets told me she wouldn't have anything to do with Tony since he copped Boots. After Big Mama's death, I started running the yard until I would almost fall out, trying to forget.
I'm saying. It's just shit you're not supposed to do. I won't say his name, but when I don't really speak on it, but I do. But it feels like if I don't speak on it, it's like it didn't happen. But that's not the truth. When our folks passed away, one of the mob started fucking with Bruh BM. And that wasn't right, cuz. And that was Bruh BM, but she was also his little business partner. So when Bruh started fucking with her on some business partnership, like what? How? How is that? How do you feel that's nobody was okay with it, but then hella folks was okay with it? Like, okay, I don't trust this nigga no more.
Forget and forgive, but it didn't do any good. There was a burning hate inside of me that no amount of running and training would relieve. I practiced punching on the...
So I'm saying that, let alone, just being in the motherfucking pen. I'm just in the motherfucking pen. I ain't passed away. I'm in the motherfucking pen. And
the big bag until I could hit with either hand with devastating effect. An old con I'd become close to asked me one day why I trained so hard. After listening to me explain, he laughed. Listen, Holson, he said, you got too much on the ball, boy, to go out and resort to violence. If you gonna be a player, you got to act like one. If Tony stole your woman, fighting him about it ain't the answer. Always remember this. What goes around comes around. You just wait and have patience. You'll get your chance to play on it. And when it comes, make sure you do it good and smooth. I listened to what he said, and acceptance came slow, but it came. Prison had taught me patience, and with calm endurance, I knew that one day my chance would come to fix Boots and Tony. Some of my bitterness vanished, so when they called my number to report to the front office for a visit, I hesitated for only a moment. Since I didn't have any kinfolks, it couldn't be anybody else but Tony. When Big Mama passed away, a lawyer came to inform me she had left $5,000 in his care for me, so there was no reason for him to come and see me again. Our business was finished until I was released. Leaving the gymnasium, I cut across the yard and reached the hall office. 30 minutes later, I was standing in the visiting room, waiting for my visit. When the door opened, I recognized my visitor at once. It had been over 6 years since I'd seen her. Before, she'd been a cute young girl. Now she was a very attractive young lady. I opened my arms, and she stepped into them as though it were the most natural act between us. When she tried to speak, I smothered her words with another kiss. I held her by the shoulders and looked down at her with genuine pleasure. Janet, how good the gods have been to you. Surely you know you have become a creation of art, I said graciously. Her laughter was soft and gentle. Horson, what have they been teaching you in this place? It was like the opening of a floodgate. Given the opportunity to talk to a female after 6 years released a torrent of words, my vocabulary had become quite extraordinary for a boy from the slums because of my eagerness to read. I just about read everything in the prison library, plus completely finished all the courses in the prison school. For the past 2 years, I've been taking college courses, and it had become noticeable in my writing and speech. We stared at each other across the visiting table. "I'm really proud of you, Horson," she said. "You've got so big since you've been here." And then she smiled at me. And you've never seen such a smile. "Why, your shoulders would make two of me." She was just about right. She wasn't exactly tiny, but she was a thin, small-built woman with delicate features, while her skin had a smooth texture that reminded one of a fine, dark mahogany. After I finally ran down, I looked at her in embarrassment. "Damn, Janet, here I've been telling you about my schoolwork and all that junk, and haven't even complimented you on all the records you keep putting out. Why, I lie awake at night sometimes just to hear them play some of your songs." She smiled, pleased. "It ain't really nothing. We just been kind of lucky. We got a good songwriter, and the breaks have been coming our way." She remained silent for a moment, then continued. "Tony asked me to give you a message for him," she said. Her eyes scanned my face for any sign of anger before she continued. "He said to tell you that he thought you was too much of a player not to recognize game when it went down, and that it was part of the dues that all players had to pay." However disagreeable what she said may have been to me, I had no intention of allowing her to see that I was irritated. She studied my expression closely. To avoid an awkward situation, I began to give her a snow job with plenty of bullshit on top. "You know, Janet, have you ever stopped and tried to figure out why so many of us from our environment, boys that is, don't try to be anything else but parasites, pimps, and just plain dope fiends?" Her mouth was wide open now, and I knew I had her. She stared at me in wonder. I could see her brain racing a mile a minute. "Many people think we're sick," I continued, "but it's not really a sickness. As I now see it, it is not the eccentricity of a single individual, but the sickness of the times themselves, the neurosis of our generation. Not because we are worthless individuals either, rather because we are products of the slums. Faced with poverty on one side, ignorance on the other, we exploit those who are nearest to us." Her eyes were big now. She was so enthused over my words that I wanted to reach over and feel her leg to see if she had had a climax. "Oh, Horson. Good. I wouldn't have thought that I'd ever hear you talk like this. What you're saying really makes sense." This had been the first time I'd been able to try out my new vocabulary on anyone other than cons or guards, and I could see what some of the smarter prisoners had said was true. If you used good diction, you could con a bee out of honey. She was so naive that I couldn't help but amuse myself a little more. "Yes, I do have a much broader outlook on life than I had when I entered this institution, but now, back to my original line of reasoning. Now, don't misunderstand me, Janet. This is not an attempt to disguise or to palliate this widespread sickness that pervades the black ghettos, but rather an attempt to try and understand why. Why is it that so many of the youth of our generation have no higher goal in life than to be pimps?" "Oh, Horson, I'm so proud of you." She hesitated for a moment, then went on. "When I first came to this visiting room, I had decided not to tell you something. But now, after listening to you talk, I feel as if I could tell you without being frightened of what you'll say." The smile that I forced was fictitious. The last thing I wanted to do was smile. I had a premonition that whatever she had to say would remove the amiable mood between us and leave a breach that would be hard to repair. She hadn't seemed to notice, because she announced, "You've heard of the pop singer Johnny Ringo, haven't you?" I stared at her coldly. You talking about the blue-eyed soul, the white boy with the #1 record out right now? Her eyes lit up. Uh-huh, that's him. We haven't announced it yet, but we're supposed to be engaged and... She froze in mid-sentence. My stare was so chilling, it paralyzed her. There was a burning rage inside of me that defied description. I'd rather see you on your deathbed first, bitch. Orson, I didn't know you were prejudiced, she said in a shocked voice. Prejudice, hell, bitch. Every time one of you black bitches gets some kind of recognition with a little money to go with it, black men ain't good enough for you. Then you ask us why we want a pimp? That's all one of you funky bitches is good for. To be used. My voice dropped low, and it was full of scorn. And to think, bitch, that you had enough nerve to tell me once about finishing school so that I could be something. He started to speak, but I interrupted. Shut up. You once told me you wouldn't have a pimp. Well, dumb bitch, just what do you think you getting engaged to? It's for goddamn sure he wouldn't look at your black ass if you didn't have all that money in the bank from your records. I continued, not giving her a chance to speak. I just wish it was possible I could see you when he took you home to introduce you to his people. They'd look at you like you just crawled out from under some rock. If it wasn't for your money, bitch, they'd probably ask you to empty the goddamn ashtrays. There were tears in her eyes as she stared at me.
Rude as fuck, bro.
I thought you had changed, Orson. But I see a better education didn't really help you.
Knew some new words.
You're still rotten underneath it all. I grabbed her arm and almost pulled her across the visiting table. Don't no black man want to see no black woman get played on, tramp. So if that's rotten, I'm rotten clean through. With the back of my hand, I wiped my lips. I have 10 times more respect for a whore than what I have for you, tramp. At least they're getting paid when they associate with a peck of wood, but you, pig, you don't have any excuse. And to think that you had the audacity to offer your lips to me. Again, I wiped my lips with the back of my hand. Then I leaned across the table and spit in her face. I pushed back my chair and got up. The guard had seen my action and was bearing down on me. Get me out of here, peck of wood, I growled at him. As I walked towards the door, I could hear her sobs behind me. Before I left the visiting room, the last sight I saw was Janet, with her head down on the table, crying. For my behavior in the visiting room, I was given 7 days in a hole. Upon my release from the hole, I ran into my buddy, the old con. He shook his head in disgust. Man, oh man, he began. Orson, I don't really know Janet Wilson, boy. And they say you really spit in that girl's face. The bitch had it coming, I stated harshly. What do you think I should have did after the bitch told me she was gonna marry a honky? Kiss her? He continued to shake his head at my ignorance. So what, fool? Do you think it helped your cause any by spitting in her face? He began to lecture me, as though I were a child. First of all, the girl had to like you, or she wouldn't have wasted her time coming up here. Second, ignorant ass nigga, the girl got big stuff. I mean big stuff. Her cash is so long that the whiteys are playing for it. So what do? Instead of smoothing her feelings out and talking her into changing her mind, you spit in her face like some damn kid. And to think that I thought you might one day be a player. No wonder your partner stole your main woman. You ain't got no style about you. It occurred to me to knock him down. But in my heart, I knew what he was telling me was true. I gritted my teeth and listened. He studied me solemnly. Here, everybody in the prison is dreaming of the opportunity that presented itself to you. All they hoping for is the opportunity to just meet a woman in her position, and here you is with one in love with you, and you don't know how to handle it.
How? is that in love? How? How? See, this is the